The desert air didn't just sit against the skin. It lived there, a heavy, velvet weight that smelled of parched earth and blooming night sage. I had come to the Obsidian Perch, a glass and steel sanctuary perched on the edge of a jagged canyon, for the kind of silence that usually only exists in the vacuum of space. I wanted to be forgotten. I wanted the world to stop asking things of me, but the moment I stepped onto the wide, sandstone terrace and looked down toward the communal fire pit, I realized the universe had different plans. 5 men were gathered around the dancing flames. They weren't just tourists. They looked like they belonged to the landscape itself, rugged, solid, and etched with the same harsh beauty as the red rocks surrounding us. The firelight played across their features, carving deep shadows and highlighting the kind of strength that doesn't come from a gym, but from a life lived against the elements. I stood in the shadows of my own deck, my heart doing a slow, heavy thrum against my ribs. I had intended to stay hidden, but as the heat of the desert day gave way to the sharp chill of the high-altitude night, a different kind of warmth began to stir in my chest. I didn't want the silence anymore. I wanted the friction. I stepped forward into the spill of light from my sliding glass door. I was wearing a silk slip dress the color of a bruised plum, the fabric so light it felt like a second skin. As I leaned against the railing, I let the silk slide, just an inch, exposing the pale curve of my shoulder to the moonlight. The conversation below didn't stop, not at first. But the energy changed. It became charged, like the air before a lightning strike. One of them, a man with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the fire pit and eyes that caught the orange glow like a predator's, slowly tilted his head back. Our eyes locked across the distance. He didn't look away. He didn't blink. He simply took a slow sip from his glass, his gaze traveling over me with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. He was reading me like a map. The others followed his lead. The quiet murmur of their voices died down, replaced by the crackle of cedar wood and the heavy pull of mutual recognition. I didn't retreat. Instead, I arched my back, stretching my arms over my head in a slow, cat-like yawn that pulled the silk tight against my frame. I knew exactly what they were seeing. And I knew exactly what I wanted them to do about it. I gave them one last look, a challenge wrapped in a smile, and turned back toward the amber glow of my suite. I didn't close the door. I left it ajar, a silent invitation whispering into the night. Before we dive deeper into the heat of the desert night, take a quick moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep these stories coming, and you won't want to miss the chapters yet to be written. Now, let's return to the canyon. I was standing at the mahogany sideboard, pouring a glass of dark, peppery Syrah, when the floorboards groaned ever so slightly. It wasn't the sound of a guest lost in the hallway. It was the sound of a man who knew exactly where he was going. I didn't turn around. I listened to the click of the door being closed, the soft thud of the deadbolt sliding into place. The air in the room suddenly felt twice as thick. "You're a long way from the city, Lyra," a voice rumbled. It was Silas, the one from the fire pit. His voice was like gravel rolling over silk, deep and resonant. I took a slow sip of my wine before finally turning. He was leaning against the doorframe, his dark hair tousled by the wind, his leather jacket smelling of wood smoke and expensive tobacco. He looked even more formidable up close. "Maybe the city didn't have what I was looking for," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He pushed off the doorframe and walked toward me. He didn't rush. He moved with a predatory grace, his boots making no sound on the heavy rug. When he stopped, he was so close I could feel the radiant heat coming off his body. "And what is it you're looking for?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Because playing games in the desert can get a person burned." I reached out, my fingers tracing the silver zipper of his jacket, feeling the hard muscle beneath. "Maybe I'm tired of being cold, Silas." His hand came up, his thumb grazing my jawline, tilting my face toward his. His eyes were dark, intense, and filled with a hunger that made my knees weak. "Careful," he whispered. "Once I start something, I don't stop until it's finished. Are you ready for that?" I didn't answer with words. I leaned in, the scent of him, cedar, rain, and pure masculinity, overwhelming my senses. When our lips finally met, it wasn't a question, it was a collision. It was the breaking of a dam. He lifted me onto the edge of the heavy oak table, his hands firm and sure on my waist. The friction of his denim against my silk was a spark to a fuse. But just as the world began to blur into a haze of sensation, the latch on the terrace door clicked. I pulled back, breathless, my heart hammering. 4 figures stood on the balcony, framed by the starlight. Elias, the one with the steady, intellectual gaze. Thorn, who looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. Remy, with his mischievous, dangerous grin. And Julian, the eldest, who carried an air of quiet, absolute authority. "You didn't think Silas was the only one who saw the signal, did you?" Julian asked, stepping into the room. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. The room, which had felt large moments ago, was suddenly crowded with their presence. They didn't hover awkwardly. They moved in like a tide, surrounding the table where Silas and I sat. "Is this a problem?" Thorn asked, his voice a low growl, his eyes fixed on me. I looked at Silas, who was watching me with a proprietary smirk, and then at the others. The air was vibrating with tension, a shared understanding that needed no explanation. Most women would have been intimidated. I felt like I was finally waking up. "It's only a problem if you're planning on standing over there all night," I said, reaching out a hand toward Elias. The shift was instantaneous. The tension broke and reformed into something much more potent. Elias took my hand, his skin cool and smooth compared to Silas's heat. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to the inside of my wrist, his eyes never leaving mine. "I think we can find a better use for our time," he murmured. The night became a kaleidoscope of touch and sound. We moved from the table to the sprawling, oversized bed that faced the glass walls. The desert was our witness, the moonlight silvering the scene as the boundaries between us dissolved. Silas was the anchor, his strength providing a constant, grounding force. He held me with a possessiveness that made me feel safe enough to lose control. Behind me, I felt the warmth of Thorn, his large hands steadying my hips, his breath hot against the nape of my neck. Remy was the fire, his touch light and teasing, constantly moving, finding the places that made me gasp and arch my back. Remy was the fire, his touch light and teasing, constantly moving, finding the places that made me gasp and arch my back. He thrived on the reactions he pulled from me, his laughter low and appreciative whenever I called out his name. Julian and Elias were the architects of the experience. Julian's hands were masterful, knowing exactly how much pressure to apply, when to push, and when to pull back. Elias was more observational, his touch precise and focused, his eyes tracking every flicker of emotion across my face. It was a symphony of 5 different energies, all focused on a single point. Me. I felt like I was being unmade and put back together again. Every time I thought I had reached my limit, another hand would find me, another voice would whisper an encouragement, and another wave of sensation would pull me back under. "Look at me, Lyra," Julian commanded softly. I opened my eyes, my vision swimming. All 5 of them were there, a circle of heat and desire. They weren't just taking, they were giving. It was a shared language of the body, a conversation where every word was a touch. The rhythm of the night moved like the desert wind, sometimes a gentle breeze, sometimes a scouring gale. I lost track of time. I lost track of where I ended and they began. There was only the sound of heavy breathing, the scent of skin on skin, and the overwhelming, beautiful weight of being completely, utterly seen. As the intensity reached its peak, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The troubles I had come here to escape, the noise of the city, the expectations of others, the loneliness of my own mind had vanished. In this room, in this moment, there was only the truth of the body. When the final crescendo came, it wasn't a sharp break, but a slow, shattering release that seemed to ripple through all of us at once. I fell back into the pillows, my lungs burning, my skin tingling as if I'd been electrified. One by one, they settled around me. Silas pulled me into his side, my head resting on his chest, the steady beat of his heart a comfort. Thorn's hand remained on my ankle, a silent tether. Remy was stretched out at the foot of the bed, his chest heaving, a satisfied grin on his face. Elias and Julian sat nearby, their presence a protective barrier against the rest of the world. For a long time, no one spoke. We watched the stars through the glass, the Milky Way a brilliant, dusty path across the black void of the canyon. "You still want that silence?" Silas whispered, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. I smiled, closing my eyes. "No, I think I like this better." The first light of dawn began to bleed over the horizon, turning the red rocks of Sedona into glowing embers. I woke slowly, the weight of the night still heavy and sweet in my limbs. I wasn't alone. The 5 of them were still there, in various states of sleep and wakefulness. The room didn't feel crowded anymore. It felt complete. Julian was the first to notice I was awake. He was sitting by the window, a cup of black coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise. He looked at me and offered a small, knowing nod. There was no awkwardness, no morning after regret. There was only a profound sense of mutual respect. I sat up, pulling the sheets around me, feeling a sense of empowerment I had never known before. I hadn't just survived the night, I had commanded it. I had stepped into the fire and come out tempered, stronger, and more alive. One by one, they began to stir. There were quiet murmurs, shared glances, and the easy camaraderie of men who had shared something profound. We moved through the morning with a slow, deliberate grace. We watched the sun fully crest the canyon walls, painting the world in shades of gold and ochre. As I prepared to leave, Silas caught me at the door. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of desert glass, translucent and green. "A reminder," he said, pressing it into my palm. "The desert doesn't forget. And neither do we." I closed my hand over the glass, feeling its sharp edges. It was a piece of the landscape, a piece of the night. "I'll be back, I promise." He smiled, a slow, dangerous thing. "We'll be waiting." I walked down the path to my car, the desert air now cool and fresh. The silence was back, but it was different now. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full of memories, full of fire, and full of the knowledge that I was no longer the woman who had arrived here looking for a place to hide. I was the woman who had found her power in the heart of the canyon.